and you worked up, let's say you worked 40 hours in a week, that's $2,600. I don't know if you want to write that down, I can give you a calculator, but I'm just going to ask you to do two things for me. If you use $65 an hour times 40 hours a week, that's $2,600 a week. And if you work 50 weeks at that pace, that'd be $130,000 a year. Does that sound about right?
I'll trust your math.
So you entered a contract with Anderson County that Mr. Preston agreed to that could provide you, if you worked full-time, somewhere around $130,000 a year, right?
But that was not going to be necessary because I was told to stay within the frame of $40,000.
And what you entered with Mr. Preston in terms of a contract was going to pay you $65 an hour when you had never before worked for more than $15 an hour in your life, correct?
Yes.
Let's look at the services you agreed to provide to Anderson County under your contract. I'm going to show you on the screen. You can look at your exhibit. Thing of 76 on the appendix. There's, and I think Mr. Davis went through these with you, the various items that you were providing to Anderson County. One was to begin the steps to implement the farm to school program. One was to grow the farm institution program, etc. I won't read them all. Would you agree with me, Ms. Shaum, that on average during that first year from 2007 to 2008, on average you really didn't work more than about 20 hours a week under the PACT agreement?
Yes.
Now, with respect to the farm to school program, that's the first item on the list. You helped start farm to school programs in districts 2, 3, and 5, is that right?
Yes.
Would you agree with me that you don't know how many products were purchased by the schools as a result of your efforts during that first year?
Offhand, no, I don't know, but I could tell you that the contracted vendor would have that information.
And you don't know, as we sit here today, the value of the products that were purchased by these school programs, do you?
No.
If you look at the next item, farm institution, that's number 2 on the list up there. You agree with me, do you not, that between the first year of the program that you had the contract, you were unable to open marketing avenues to any institutions other than some restaurants, correct?
That's correct, because that takes a lot of time to do that.
Okay, and in the first year, you got 3 restaurants involved in making purchases. Is that right?
I don't know.
Well, it wasn't more than 3, was it?
It could have been.
Would it refresh your memory if I told you Sullivan's, Jack's, and McGee's? Do you remember having some programs with those 3 restaurants?
Yes.
Do you remember any others?
Offhand, no.
And would you agree with me, Ms. Shaum, that a farmer who wants to sell produce, fresh produce, to a restaurant in Anderson County doesn't need to go through Allison Shaum to do it?
Doesn't need to, no.
They just go directly to the restaurant and try to sell the produce.
Yes, but the part of my job was to educate these farmers to realize all of the markets that they could pursue.
And if you look up on the list, you also were involved in number 1, 2, 3, the 4th one on the list, grow the number of community-supported agriculture systems. Those are CSAs, correct?
Yes.
And you indicate at the time you signed your first contract that there already were 2 to 3 CSAs in Anderson County, right?
Yes, but the number of CSAs fluctuates every year.
And your job when you signed this contract was to try to grow that number.
Yes.
So you expect over the course of time to have more than 2 or 3, right?
Assuming those 2 or 3 were going to be in functioning the following year.
Well, you tell me if you have a different reading of it, but if you're trying to grow the number of CSAs in Anderson County, and there are currently 2 or 3, what you're hoping to accomplish is some number greater than 2 or 3 the following year, whether or not the existing ones stayed on or not. Fair enough?
If you create a new one, that would be growth. So even if those 2 or 3 didn't do it next year and you had 1, that's growth.
Okay, so from 2 to 3 down to 1, in your view, could still be growth of the CSA, as long as it's a new one.
If it's a new one, yes.
Now, let me talk to you a little bit about the food co-op, that's on here as well, right? And creation of Anderson County Food Co-op. Wouldn't you agree with me that you did not create a food co-op in the first year of this contract?
Yes.
In fact, you said that was a high priority in your direct testimony, right?
Yes, it was.
But you were unable to get it done.
The first year, I was not able to get it done.
If you talk
The
about
groundwork
grants,
was late, however.
okay. If you talk about grants, you talked about U.S. and I think you might have mentioned this, but you didn't. It's a USDA fresh fruit grant that we were talking about that some schools got. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And you said that was worth maybe $80,000.
No. The USDA Fresh Fruits and Vegetables grant, the first year was worth about $80,000. The $1,000 grant that you're referring to is the Congressional Hunger Center grant.
Yeah, I was going to get to that one in a minute. That's a different grant. But the fresh fruit grant, that was worth about $80,000, right?
Are you saying 8 or 80?
$80,000. So
Yes.
said it too fast.
Yes,
Right, that's a U.S. Department of Agriculture program. Is that fair?
it is.
And wouldn't you agree with me that you did not prepare the application for that grant?
I did not, but I worked with the school food service directors. They were not even aware that this was a grant available to them.
The school districts themselves prepared the application. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, and I assisted with the attachments to that.
And wouldn't you agree that once they know about the program, the school district doesn't need you to fill out the application?
That's
right?
the whole point of the sustainable program.
What, that they don't need you, or?
That once they learn of the information, it continues.
And the United States Department of Agriculture was trying to publicize the program themselves, wasn't it?
I'm sure they were.
So you wrote letters in the end to support the grant application for the district, fair enough?
Yes.
Couldn't any citizen of Anderson County write letters to support the application?
I don't know how much weight that would have.
What they could, couldn't they?
Sure.
And you talked about this other grant, the Congressional Hunger Grant. That is a grant that you wrote the application for, correct?
Yes.
And that one was worth about $1,000, right?
Yes.
You talked about the conference you set up with local farmers and agreed, it sounded like you agreed when you talked to Mr. Davis that didn't bring any money to Anderson County, wouldn't you say?
I'm sure it did bring some, but not a significant amount like the CFSA conference did.
And the CFSA conference we've already talked about, that's an annual conference of the CFSA.
Yes.
So they were going to have it anyway, just didn't know where they were going to have it.
Yes, but it came to Anderson.
Your first contract, you agree, did not have any kind of termination date, did it?
No.
It was month to month.
Yes.
And you had no reason to think that Anderson County was going to terminate your contract during that first year, did you?
No.
The first contract that we looked at earlier makes no mention of renewal, does it?
No, it doesn't make mention, but we had spoken of it.
Okay, and that's what I'm getting at. You say you spoke with Mr. Preston about it, but it makes no mention of it in the contract, does it?
Right?
It makes no mention in the contract of it being a trial program, does it?
No. That was understood between us.
And you don't indicate in the contract anywhere that a new contract will be created after a year based on performance, do you?
No.
That's something you could have included in the contract language, couldn't you?
I guess I could have included a lot of things, but I didn't.
You agree ultimately you sought a new contract in October of 2008?
Yes.
And that was your idea, you said?
Yes.
You sent a proposal to Mr. Preston on October 27, 2008. I think we looked at it a little bit earlier. I think it's exhibit number plaintiff 76A. I put it on the screen as well, but I think you have it in front of you, Ms. Shaum. Wouldn't you agree that that's your proposal sent on October 27, 2008?
Yes.
And you sent it to Mr. Preston?
Yes.
In your email, I'm going to blow up the content of the email itself. You indicate not that this is an amendment to a contract, and not that it's a renewal of a contract. You indicate that it's a new contract, don't you?
Yes.
And you don't say in your email to Mr. Preston anything about, hey, as a reminder of what we discussed a year ago, I'm sending you a new contract for review, do you?
No.
You don't mention to him in your email that this is a renewal of the prior contract, do you?
No.
And you said, I think, that you did not tell your father that you were trying to get this new contract, did you?
No.
At this point in time, by October of 2008, wouldn't you agree that your father knew about your first contract with Anderson County?
Yes.
He learned about that through what, the paper?
I have no idea.
Wouldn't you agree that at some point, Mr. Wilson learned that you had a consulting contract with Anderson County?
Yes.
Wouldn't you agree with me that he was not very happy when he found that out?
Yes.
And he made it clear to you that he was upset about this news, wouldn't you agree?
Yes.
And so even though after your father found out about the first contract and was upset about it, you still chose not to tell him you were looking for a new contract. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
When you proposed this draft language, attached to this exhibit is a draft contract, right?
Yes.
And that's something that you say you created,
Yes.
and you had no help from anyone?
No.
You didn't get a draft from any attorney?
No.
You didn't get a draft from Mr. Preston?
No.
Is this the second contract you ever drafted in your life?
Yes.
In your proposal, you request an increase in the hourly pay, don't you?
Yes.
And you're going to jump under this contract from the $65 an hour you were already receiving to a graded salary of $75, then $85, then $95 an hour annually, right?
Yes.
And this contract, unlike the first contract, includes a termination provision, doesn't it?
Yes.
And that termination provision is the one-way street, isn't it?
What do you mean by
And
that?
by that I mean, if you terminated this contract, you didn't have to pay the county any money, did you?
No.
But if the county terminated the contract, they had to pay you 3 years' worth of pay, didn't they?
Yes. But the county could have also put a minimum on my hours.
Okay, we're going to talk about that in a minute. If you look at the remedy for breach section of the contract, which is 5.1, that's the provision you were talking about, right? Where the county would have to pay you if they terminated the contract, right?
Yes.
And are you still looking at the proposal version,
I'm looking,
76A? Not the signed version, in other words.
I am looking at 76A.
And in your proposal, what you indicated they should have to pay over 3 years if they terminated was your contract rate as if 20 hours a week were worked, right?
Yes.
And that was consistent with about how much you were actually working under the first contract, wouldn't you say?
Yes.
20 hours a week. Then if you look at the actual contract, which is exhibit number 77 in your binder, and look at the same provision, 5.1, remedy for breach. The figure in that contract was jumped from 20 hours a week to 30 hours a week, wasn't it?
Yes.
You did not increase that number, did you?
No.
Mr. Preston did that, right?
I see.
He's the one you were working with to negotiate the deal, right?
Yes.
Did you work with anyone else other than Mr. Preston about this deal?
No.
And he did that, he increased that from 20 to 30 hours a week without any discussion from you, correct?
Yes.
Now, if we compare the services, I'm just going to show you what I hope is a side-by-side comparison of the services under the first contract, which if you may have to pull this out of your binder to do this, or you can look at the board if it'll fit. If you look at, if you wanted to pull them out, you can look at exhibit plaintiff's number 76 compared to plaintiff's up 77. And I guess what you really need to look at is appendix number 1 of the first agreement. I think I got most of them on the screen there. And it's appendix 1 of exhibit 76. And it's part 2 of exhibit 77. I don't know if you have those in front of you yet.
I'm going to clear that up.
just let me know when you have it.
Did you say part one?
Appendix 1, I'm sorry, of the first contract. Because that lists your services. And it's actually section 2 of the second contract. You have it in front of you?
Yes.
And on the screen, the red box is the first contract, and the blue box is the second contract. And what I'm trying to get you to look at is, Shaum, is if you start with the first thing that you were supposed to do under the first contract, would you agree that both contracts require you to begin the steps to implement the farm to school program in Anderson County?
Yes.
There's no change in what you had to do for Anderson County there, is there?
No.
Then if you look at the second bullet point of the first contract, it tells you that you're supposed to grow the farm to institution programs in Anderson County, right?
Yes.
But in the second contract, there's a little bit of a change. It says you need to implement/grow the farm to institution program, right?
I must be looking at the wrong thing, because mine are saying the same thing.
Now, I approach you on
You may.
Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, this one's wrong. This one, orange one, the first. There's that section of services. So on the first contract, looking at the second bullet point, we talked about growing the farm institution program. Now do you see that?
Yes.
Whereas the second one had slightly different language talking about implement/grow the farm institution program. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So that implies that the program might not have even been started at that point. If you have to implement it.
Yes, but my English is not my forte, for sure.
If you look at the third bullet point on the first contract, it says creation of Anderson County Food Co-op, whereas the second contract says begin the steps to create an Anderson County Food Co-op. And you agreed with me, if I heard you correctly, that in the first year of the contract, you were not able to get an Anderson County Food Co-op created, right?
Right.
So you're still going to start from ground zero on that according to the second contract, right? So
Some work had been done, but it wasn't to me enough to qualify as being there.
okay, and then if you look at the fourth line item, it's talking about CSAs under the first contract. You're supposed to grow the number, and there were currently 2 or 3. Under the second contract, all you have to do is attempt to grow the number, right?
Yes.
And there are only 1 to 2 at that point, right?
Yes.
So the net number of CSAs in Anderson County over the course of that first year dropped from 2 to 3 down to 1 to 2. Would you agree?
It did, and the reason for that is I was delving very deep in the farm to school program, and that took the majority of my focus that first year.
And the last item just says you have to coordinate an increase in farm sales under one contract. And that's okay.
I got it.
And then the second contract says coordinate farm sales to local restaurants. So in the first contract, you're supposed to seek an increase in farm sales. In the second one, you're just supposed to coordinate farm sales, right?
Yes.
If you look now at the last provision that we've got going on, under the new contract that you got with Mr. Preston, it's 2.2 vital services, right? You
Yes.
see that? It says Anderson County recognizes that the services under this agreement are vital to PAC and must be continued without interruption, right?
Yes.
So it's kind of hard for Anderson County to drop you down to 1 hour a week if the contract says it recognizes the services are vital and must be continued without interruption. Would you agree?
Yes.
And in fact, the county didn't have the option of cutting you down to 1 hour a week, did it?
Yes.
Well, let me ask you this. After that 2008 contract took place, with Mr. Preston signing it, the county did try at some point to impose a limit on the number of hours you work, didn't it?
Yes.
And when they did that, you hired Brian Murphy to threaten a lawsuit against the county, saying that you couldn't reduce your hours, right?
At that time, the county had not paid me, and that's why I engaged Mr. Murphy's services.
And they were also threatening to limit your hours, weren't they?
They had, and I was abiding by that as much as I could. I had a meeting with Mr. Brill. He asked me to keep my hours between 15 and 20, and that's what I was doing. But at that same time, the county was not paying me.
That's all the questions I have, Shaum.
News, you may.
Real briefly. You were asked about a litany of jobs in your employment history. Do you recall that?
Yes,
You recall being asked about your last hourly wage being about $15 an hour?
yes,
During all of those jobs, were you an employee of those entities?
yes,
When you first came to Anderson County to make your pitch, was your pitch one where you'd be an employee?
I thought I was, yes.
And as an employee, what was the dollar amount that you pitched?
20,
When you first came to Anderson County in 2007, in the summer, what other consultants do you know in South Carolina who were offering these services?
none,
If no one else was doing it, wouldn't someone have to be the first?
yes,
You were asked several questions about both the original PAC contract and the second PAC contract. Do you recall those questions?
yes.
Were there any resources that you resorted to in relation to drafting those contracts, Ms. Shaum?
The internet,
Were you able to go buy contracts on the internet?
yes. But that's not what I did.
You were asked about an email that you sent attaching the proposed draft of the PAC contract on October 27th of 2008. Do you remember that?
Yes,
Would you have had conversations with Mr. Preston before sending that email?
yes,
You were also asked about a series of restaurants that were included in the program that you were helping promote in Anderson County. Was another restaurant Friends?
yes,
So there were other restaurants, you just don't remember them, right?
yes,
You were asked questions about grants that were received by the school districts. Do you recall that?
yes,
Were those grants received by the school districts because at that point you had implemented the farm to school program?
yes,
Were the grants a direct result of your implementation of that program?
Perception,
yes,
leading, and speculation.
Let's
Would-
just lay some foundation for those questions on sustained objection on meeting. You may proceed.
What were the nature of those grants?
The nature of the grants were, we had to show that there were relationships being built and forged between the schools and the farmers. The fact that we were using that money locally was a huge factor because it wasn't required. That was the school district's way of being innovative. And all of the marketing materials that the nonprofit provided for the farmers were exhibits, if you will, in the grant money. The school gardens, all of this played a huge impact in the schools getting the grants.
To your knowledge, before you implemented the farm to school program, what programs existed in Anderson County which would render those school districts eligible for the grants?
None.
After you implemented that program, what made them eligible for those grants?
It was all of the educational components in the farm to school program.
Were you provided by a top-line budget? Did Mr. Preston provide you a top-line budget with respect to your spending under the original PAC contract?
The $40,000 budget.
And how much alone did the school districts receive in grants as a consequence from the farm to school program?
Between the USDA Fresh Fruits and Vegetables grants, the American Recovery Reinvestment Act grants, I think the last count was around 200,000, give or take. It's probably a little bit more than 200,000.
Again, Ms. Shaum, thank you for being here this morning.
Yes, Mr. Tester.
Nothing further, sir.
All right, ma'am, you may step down. Do you wish to excuse the witness?
Mind if I ask you,
Mr. Davis? You wish to excuse the witness?
Yes, Your Honor, I'm
All
sorry.
right, ma'am, I'm going to excuse you from any further participation in the case. I will caution you that I have placed all witnesses under a sequestration order. You're not allowed to discuss